We begin our series of talks this morning with Kathy Sinnott, who is going to be speaking. Who's going to be speaking on the politico-cultural situation, and I'll just introduce Kathy now. Kathy Sinnott is a member of the European Parliament for Munster, Ireland, and chair of the Hope Project, an Irish project aiming to bring hope to people struggling with a disability and to their families. Kathy is a vigorous defender of Christian values and of life at all stages. She has had many activities in the European Parliament, but is especially active in the areas of disability, family, bioethics and health policy. She is a member of 8 parliamentary committees, 3 delegations, and vice president of a number of intergroups. She is a mother of 9 children and a guardian of 7 nieces and nephews. So please welcome Kathy Sinnott for our first talk this morning.
And that introduction is valid for 1 more month, and then we'll change the script. I've been asked today to explore the political and cultural environment in which Pope John Paul the Great's theology of the body seeks to gain understanding and acceptance. Now, John Paul II focused a light on a beautiful truth, the beautiful truth of God, and that we find in our God-given dignity as a human person, and in the loving relationship ordained by God between persons, between husbands and wives, between fathers and mothers, between fathers and mothers and their children. And in doing this, he's given us a tremendous gift. He's also given us a very timely gift, because for some time now, it's not just the theology of the body, but the very existence of God, the value of the person, and the meaning of love have all been challenged by our culture in many significant ways. In the political sphere, which is increasingly European and even global, these cultural challenges have had the effect of rendering God officially invisible. From those who deny his existence to those who are in competition with God for people's attention, God is increasingly relegated. The Pope is almost alone today in our media in being able to get some coverage for the Word of God. And even this coverage seems to be focused on catching the Pope out and creating controversy rather than allowing him a platform and listening to what he has to say. In terms of recent political structures, God, who was included in foundational documents last century, is not welcome now. For example, though many wanted an acknowledgement of God in the European Constitution, a conscious decision was taken to exclude him, and votes were taken to cement this. At a president's luncheon in honor of Bertie Ahern's visit to the Parliament a little over 2 years ago, there was a discussion of the failed Constitution and of its new version, the Lisbon Treaty, which was at that point under discussion, under formulation. A Polish MEP at the lunch suggested that some alterations be made to the content of the new version while it was being created. President Borrell of the Parliament, who was then President of the Parliament, nearly jumped, and he stopped him quickly, and he said that they could not make any significant changes to the treaty or it would reopen what? That contentious and controversial question of God. This was the big fear. He said that was decided, it had been a bitter battle, and no one was willing to go through that controversy again. The older documents that do acknowledge a God and even invoke his protection have been gradually relegated by EU treaties and recent international conventions. For example, our own Constitution, whose eclipse will be completed when we pass what will be called Amendment 29 in October, if we pass Amendment 29. And if any of you remember Amendment 28 that we voted on last June, it said, in fact, yesterday, last June, it said nothing in this Constitution, and it went on the formula saying that absolutely nothing in the Constitution would supersede the new European Union set up by Lisbon or anything that was created by any of its institutions, any of its agencies, or even any of its committees. So the least committee in Europe would take precedence over our Constitution. God, once out of the official, legal, and public realm, is instead increasingly relegated to the private sphere, and by that I mean strictly private. Anti-discrimination legislation recently passed in the Parliament, and that I mean this spring, bans discrimination on the basis of religion. And it will be able to, and what will this mean? Well, it was interesting to see who voted for it. It was voted for all of the most anti-religious faction in the Parliament because it can be used to uphold the freedom from religion more easily than the freedom for religion. And if I can give you an example, a person will be able to invoke this legislation if they consider a crucifix on a hospital wall, a nativity scene in a public place, or a sermon preached discriminates against him or her. Another possibility of this legislation is that a Catholic chapel will not be able to remain open unless there's also a Protestant, an Orthodox chapel, humanist counseling rooms, Jewish synagogue, Muslim prayer rooms, and whatever else ensures that no one feels any discrimination. It will obviously be cheaper for a hospital or an airport or whatever, and easier just to close the offending chapel. The question of the right to use religion as a basis for hiring a teacher, guidance counselor, nurse, or doctor in religiously sensitive positions has already been questioned by Brussels. The Irish government have already received a warning letter on this issue. With the new anti-discrimination legislation, I think the question will be answered. But even in the privacy of your own home, there is the possibility, under children's rights legislation, that the right to teach your children will not be absolutely assured either. The right of the child to self-determination and the right of the state, not the family, to be decider of the best interest of the child, potentially could have an effect on what parents may or may not impart to their children. The potential of what amounts to suppression of religion is real if the logic of the legislation plays out, which I hope it will not. And this in turn depends on the grace of God and on the efforts of religious people, people who respect religion, to witness to their faith in everyday life. But it also depends on the determination of the enemies of faith to see that the faithful do not get their way. There's an active core group in the Parliament called the Intergroup for Separation of Church and State, who target for elimination religious, especially Catholic, influence in our legal and political life. Should they and others like them succeed, God will truly be relegated not just to our private homes, but to, I think, essentially an underground. In terms of and as I say, hopefully this will not happen. But I know this group, they're very definitely leaders in the Parliament, and I have to honestly tell you that in the last 5 years, although we've put up many, many hard-fought battles, we have almost no pro-life victory in the last 5 years. And the threats to life, the constant amendments that say sexual and reproductive rights, and the threats to marriage used to be once every few months. Now these amendments are often 3 and 4 in every voting session, which is a monthly event. In terms of the theology of the body, it is hard to have a theology, a study of God of any type, influencing the political culture that excludes God and in many practical ways denies him. What is more, if the current political direction is pursued, God will not be the only victim. Authority and legitimacy will go with him. Jesus made it very clear in his words to Pontius Pilate that all authority comes from God. Although our leaders may not understand why they lack authority and legitimacy, Even now they sense its weakness. If Lisbon is anything, it is an effort by the EU to create the authority and legitimacy that it lacks. However, because they miss the whole point of why they lack it, they repeatedly, and this point is repeatedly made by Benedict, but also was made by John Paul II, that a united and successful Europe will only be created on a foundation of Christian values. This treaty, which they don't get the point, this treaty is about control and the consolidation of power into fewer and fewer hands to effect the control that they so desperately realize they need. Having lost sight of Christ and his call to love and freedom, they've fallen into the trap of thinking like dictators. Free men and women are not denied referenda, and when they do have them, ordered to vote again. Early this year, I took part in what is called the first exchange of views on the final and the definitive report on the Temporary Committee on Climate Change. And now this report was called 2050, The Future Begins Today. Obviously, from my way of thinking, a wonderful opportunity to reorient the citizens of Europe to a respect for natural law, creation, and the realities of nature. Mr. Florence, the author of this sweeping report, began the main section of the report with a simple statement about man being the protectors of creation. The first speaker was an Irish MEP, Avril Doyle, who complimented her group colleague for a brilliant and comprehensive report. However, she said that there was only one error, one thing that must be removed, and that was the word creation. In a subsequent vote in this committee, creation was deleted, and the replacement sentence says something fuzzy about man taking care of the environment from generation to generation. When Mr. Florence, the author, attempted to have the creation formula reinstated as an amendment to his own report in the full assembly, a majority of the Parliament's MEPs voted against it. Why? Because quite obviously creation has what? A creator. And that wouldn't do it all. After so thoroughly eliminating God from the EU, any breach was not to be tolerated. Just think of the damage a creator could do to so carefully constructed a worldview. That, the thought that this worldview, that we and everything that surrounds us is here by chance, and that survival of the fittest is the foundation of human relationship and explains all natural phenomena. You can't have a creator around that. A creator would deny that. A creator would give us, again, the idea that there was actually a beautiful plan by a loving and knowing God. Couldn't be tolerated. This worldview, in turn, does not just lead to control and elitism, because, of course, you have to have the fittest are the ones that obviously know better than everybody else. But it makes that control by elites an urgent necessity. After all, once you have concluded that everything you see and even yourself is the result of blind chance, then you must also conclude that there is an absolute necessity on us today with our use of science and our advanced technology to take control of blind chance and to shape the changes of the future. Knowledgeable elites must be chosen to decide on needed improvements to nature, and powerful elites chosen to force these improvements in spite of the wishes of an unwilling populace. And this is the basis of the kind of control structures we have, and this goes from the UN Assembly on Climate Change to the World Health Organization, etc., that this basic current of thought that we just couldn't know what's good for us. So an elite has to know, and in order to get us accepted, has to control the decisions that are made. The word creation has the potential to unpick this whole setup, because any aspect of creation, like the theology of the body, can be an entry point to God. Jesus invited us to learn of God's loving providence from the lilies of the field, to learn of his loving protection from the eagles in the air, etc. It's vital to the secular worldview that when someone sees an eagle care for its young, that they think only of evolutionary advantage, because otherwise the potential for conversion is always there. I had a friend that maintained that anyone who pursued the truth about anything, honestly and persistently, would wind up believing and loving God. To illustrate, he often told the story of an anti-religious friend whose hobby of collecting and studying butterflies led him over the years to become a devout believer. There's no aspect of God's creation that is more immediate and accessible for study than the body. We all have one. It's with us all the time. We all have, which makes the theology of the body, which finds a catechism implanted by the Creator in this amazing creation of our body, as it becomes an ever-present threat. I have a friend who is coming closer and closer to a belief in a natural order and a God just through her pursuit to regain her health. In studying her own body, she's becoming closer and closer to actually acknowledging somebody must have made it with who knew what they were doing. Our believing politicians are asleep. They must urgently wake up and must ask themselves why the word creation is so offensive to their colleagues. Further, politicians who believe in God must think long and hard about what they truly believe themselves, not just with their minds and emotions, but with their actions and their loyalties. They would do well to ask themselves who God is and the implications of that. They must consider, and we must all consider, that if God exists and if God is God, then that is the single most important reality.